Welcome to the Lawless Astrology channel. My name's Dabney Lawless. I'm an evolutionary astrologer, and what we're going to be looking at today is the Jupiter-Saturn square. And that's going to be energy we're dealing with for the next year. But the very first pass of it is going to happen on August 19th, the same day as the full moon in Aquarius squaring the sun. So, very big energy, something that I'm going to hopefully help you unpack so you can get this energy right in your own life and how we can have a positive response here in the collective as well. The Lawless Astrology channel, if you've not been here before, what we do is we look at how we can take the planetary energies and work with the cosmos to co-create a life that's more peaceful, conscious, and hopefully a little bit more joyous. So, if this is content you're interested in, I hope you stick around. Okay, so what we're talking about is Jupiter squaring Saturn. This is going to be exact on the first pass on August 19th. But forgive me while I kind of give you a little bit of setting the stage about what's going on and talk a little astro speak for a few minutes, but then I'm going to get to the kind of really the nuts and bolts of what's happening, so hopefully it can be helpful information. So Jupiter and Saturn were conjunct for the first time in an air sign, so starting a new 20-year cycle in December 2020. That was when COVID was just coming into our awareness. Really, the first cases of COVID were happening in China in 2020, and it probably had already begun circulating even here in the United States by that time. So that was when we really started to recognize that there is an internal push-pull that we needed to integrate between freedom and boundaries and restriction and growth and overexuberance. So fast forward to now. This is the first time since that conjunction that we're testing out the next Jupiter-Saturn touch-it point, and it's a square. So basically, we're taking the information that we learned during COVID and we're now moving it to the next level. And a square is challenging energy. It can cause friction, but there's a lot less friction with a square if you got it right the first time when the two energies met. So every time two outer planets, or these are actually social planets is what they're called, but they're slower moving. They're not like Venus, Mars, Mercury. These planets do have some impact on society at large. So this is not only going to be personal for each of us, but it's also collective energy and something that we have to get right as a society, as a collective, right? So earlier in the week, Mars is going to be conjuncting Jupiter. And Mars is electric energy. It's like really kind of forceful, aggressive. So Mars is like gearing up for battle and standing there next to Jupiter, sort of energizing Jupiter. And Jupiter does not need to be energized. Jupiter's already kind of big energy. So we have that in the sign of Gemini. It's going to be making a square to Saturn and Pisces. I did a whole video about Saturn and Pisces that you might want to check out. When you have two planets that are in square like this, we have to kind of figure out, Saturn's the slower moving planet, so it sort of trumps Jupiter. But really when we're talking about individuals, we have to figure out in your life, where are you maybe potentially out of balance with your Saturn? Or where are you out of balance with your Jupiter? So I'm going to tell two stories that are both Jupiter-Saturn stories, but one really illustrates the shadow of Saturn and one really illustrates the shadow of Jupiter. So when I was a kid, we didn't have much money and I didn't have nice clothes. I didn't ever have, the latest albums or anything like that. I wasn't really particularly popular and I was bullied a lot. So it was really exciting when I got invited to a sleepover with someone who lived on the right side of town. I lived on the wrong side of the tracks. She lived on the right side of the tracks. So I went to her house for this sleepover and I was really excited. And one of her friends who I'd never met before came. And she was so pretty. and clearly very wealthy. She had the coolest outfit on, and she brought with her the new Police CD, which at the time everyone loved the Police. It was like in the late 80s. And she was showing everyone an ankle bracelet from her boyfriend. Now, I don't know why this stuck with me, but I remember thinking at the time, like, she's so much better than I am. No one would ever do that for me. She's so cool and pretty and wealthy. And all I felt was shame. I felt tremendous shame that I didn't have those things. And I couldn't even imagine that I ever would. And that anyone would ever care for me enough to buy me a piece of jewelry. Now, that was the shadow side of Saturn. So she came in with her very Jupiterian energy, and she was just living her best life. She didn't do anything wrong. She was actually just, one of those kind of fortunate girls and who knows what was going on in her life behind the scenes, but at that party, she was cool. And I wasn't. But the shadow side of Saturn is stuck. It is kind of feeling like everything will not be okay. Like doom and gloom, fear-based, thinking the worst. Really kind of, it's shame, right? And like I felt shame, like I wasn't good enough. So there was a tremendous insecurity that I felt. So let's flip over to the shadow side of Jupiter in a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. So not long ago, I read a story about an Instagram influencer who had a beautiful life. She shopped at Chanel and she got $800 facials and she worked out with celebrity trainers and she was incredibly popular on Instagram and she had the perfect house and the perfect husband and the perfect kids. And, her whole life was on Instagram as just this unbelievably perfect Jupiterian presence. And so many people wanted a piece of it because of the wealth and the beauty and the fashion and just all the things that make us want to be more than we are, right? So everyone kind of wanted a piece of that. But the unfortunate thing is it was all a house of cards. It wasn't real. And they didn't have money. She didn't even really have an awareness that they didn't have money, that they were in tremendous debt and they were leveraged well beyond where they should be. And it didn't end well, as you can imagine. They lost everything and the family fell apart. And, it's just a tragic story. But that is the shadow side of Jupiter, is the inauthenticity, is the showiness, is the kind of larger than life without discipline, without boundaries, without grounded authenticity. There's kind of just this facade, especially in Gemini, social media, I'm getting a call. So this sense of, I wish that they could have just been much more authentic and real and honest with one another about their financial situation. I wish they could have been much more real and authentic and honest about their situation with their followers. So you can sort of see how those two extremes, right? Just kind of sticking your head in the sand, pretending like everything's okay, overly optimistic, exaggerating, lying even, like, this kind of, I'm the king of everything. Like Jupiter is, this big energy. Or, here is me when I'm little, like can't even imagine that anyone would love me enough and that I would have money someday and that I could potentially, be worthy the same way this girl was worthy, right? And so that was just my own insecurities and my own shadow of Saturn. So the midpoint of Gemini and Pisces is Taurus. So I think what this square is asking of us is that we look to our authentic self. We look at what do we really value? Who do we really care about? What do we really care about? How can we come to a place of inner stability where we have true self-worth? Because both Jupiter and Saturn can have authentic self-worth. And that's something for the individual that I think we want to come to, Ronnie Pontiac talks about squares in a way that I love, which is squares, which is the aspect that we're dealing with here, the challenging aspect. Squares get us somewhere. It's like stairs. We're climbing stairs. But if you're not paying attention, you can slip and fall. And I think that's it. If we're watching astrology videos and we know this energy is coming, we can pay attention. And we can ask ourselves, are we in our Jupiter shadow? Are we in our Saturn shadow? Are we overly optimistic? Are we sticking our head in the sand? Are we denying reality? Are we thinking things need to be a certain way? And if they're not, then we're a failure. And, projecting an image that is inauthentic. Are we in Saturn thinking nothing will ever go right and feeling almost like a victim mentality and really doom and gloom and fear and studying that energy too much? If you are in the shadow side of either of these, this is an opportunity to come to the middle. This is an opportunity to balance those energies. So if you are, like I said, Saturn's pulling Jupiter and saying, you need structure, you need boundaries. If you're in debt, or if you're, not being truthful with yourself, Saturn's not going to let you get away with it this time. Saturn's going to say, let's be truthful. Let's get real. Let's get serious. Let's have a financial plan. If you are constantly feeling sorry for yourself and depressed and don't want to get out of bed, or you feel like, the weight of the world is on your shoulders, Jupiter is saying it's going to be okay. You need to relax a little. You need to have a little bit more fun, and you need to recognize that there is luck and there is magic and there is a plan out there, right? So if you are willing to take those steps consciously, if you're willing to walk up the stairs consciously, you can really get very far at this time. This also happens on the full moon in Aquarius, which is squaring Uranus. So what this says is something's got to give. Something's got to change. We're not going back to the way things used to be. This is, full moon flicks the lights on and exposes the secrets. It says, okay, let's take a look at what we're dealing with here. And then you have it squaring Uranus. Well, I can tell you the sun square Uranus is about not caring what other people think about you and just living in pure authenticity. And it might be uncomfortable, but that's what you're being called to do on this day, okay? So let's talk a little bit about, so that's the individual, right? So reflect on your own personal life and say, which one of these things do I need to balance? Do I need to find a little bit more joy and optimism and faith, or do I need to find a little bit much more grounded discipline? So really that's kind of the best way that you can individually look at this. Okay, let's look at this at the collective, all right? So we're all in this election mess. And you know that the United States election impacts the whole world. So this is the first night of the Democratic National Convention. So what's interesting about astrology is sometimes the symbolism is so right out there and literal, and you can really kind of predict what's going to happen. So everyone, knew with Algol something big was going to happen. And with the full moon in Capricorn, I didn't talk about it publicly, but privately I did talk about that I thought Joe Biden was going to step down that day because the symbolism was just so literal. Okay. Now, we have so many different things going on because Mars is conjuncting Jupiter. Mercury is retrograde. That Mars-Jupiter is squaring Saturn. It's a full moon. It's squaring Uranus. There's just a lot going on. So it's harder to know collectively and to predict what this is going to mean for these two campaigns. Okay, but what I do want to say is I'm going to look at the symbolism, right? And the symbolism is not that different than what we just talked about. So who is it that is inauthentic? Who is it that is fear-mongering and negative and trying to scare people and in a state of constant sort of depression? Who is exaggerating things? Who is telling lies? Who is saying that, their rally was bigger than Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech? Who is feeling insecure and bad about themselves So they are then projecting an image of mistruth and, really inauthenticity. Okay, so we can probably figure out who that is. So the karma here, the higher road of what this is all about is kind of saying like, that's not going to fly anymore. Something has to give. So I think that that's important to notice that this may be the first day of the DNC convention or Democratic National Convention. But I don't know who it's going to impact and how. All I can say is being in your authentic self, balancing the responsibility and the proper vision for the future. Jupiter is future, optimism, joy. Saturn, high side of both of these integrating is in Gemini. It's like fresh ideas. It's exciting people. It's bringing people together over social media, projecting an authentic optimism. Also, boundaries, having good boundaries, being responsible, being parental. So, I think that we may still be in for some twists and turns, but I think it's kind of like we are not going back. I think there is, we're crossing that Rubicon with this Uranus square. It's like, if we are authentic, if we are telling the truth, if we're in our higher self, then we are going to reap the benefits. I really do believe that, individually and collectively. If we are off track, something is going to come in from the outside to help get us on track. And I believe that as well. So I would say collectively, it's not that different than the individual. It's like really kind of sitting into that Taurus midpoint. Who are you? How can you know what your values are? And how can you stand by those values? How can you have self-worth and self-esteem that radiates without, responsibility and joy can go together. So it's Mercury retrograde. So this is the second time I've had to do this video because the first time I forgot my microphone because Mercury retrograde. So anyway, I picked a card because one of the things I would say with all this kind of jumble of energy is, it's hard to sort out all of the different meanings and what can happen. So I like this deck. It's called the Voyager Tarot, and I can put a link in below. It's not an affiliate or anything. It's just I like it. And this was the card I picked. If you can see it, I don't know. Anyway, it says trust. It's the Six of Wands. And really what this is about, because the question I asked in the last video when I was shuffling it, was all cool, but here we are. I already picked it. What I asked was like, what do we need to know collectively? And what it is like, this is trust. Trust that this is all part of what's happening. This is part of the bigger energy shift that we're all going through. So right now is the time that we can plant the seeds, right? Have the positive vision, know where we're going, where we want to go, put the discipline and the hard work behind our joyous vision and our optimism and our faith, but be authentic. Have self-worth. Know that we are worth more than what we've been given the past however many years, and trust that this is just one piece of this puzzle that is unfolding throughout the next couple years as all the outer planets shift to new signs. So I hope that this has been informative and helpful and helps break down kind of a complicated time. And as always, the universe is conspiring to help us. There's a reason and a season for it all. Please like and subscribe, comment, tell me your Jupiter Saturn stories. I'd love to hear them. And have a great week, stargazers.